Do you have what it takes to be the next president? There's only one way to find out. In swing state, you'll compete with friends and family to win the favor of the American people. Hit the campaign trail running, visit every state on the map, and use your hard-won political influence to control crucial electoral votes. Participate in the debate, flip key states away from your opponents, and avoid making costly gaffes as you carve your own path to victory. Because in swing state, every vote counts in the race to the White House. So I guess I'll go ahead and jump into a brief rundown of how you actually play swing state. The first step, of course, is going to be setting up the board. So each player, and you can have anywhere from 2 to 6 players in the game, should grab the pawn of their choice and also the 3 field office tokens of the same color as their pawn. Everyone's pawn will start on the debate space in the corner right over here by DC. All of the game cards that say swing state on the back, these red game cards right here, should be placed in the spot on the board that says draw. These will be the cards that you take from each turn. The 2-sided schedule card should be kept separate. The state cards, which are these little blue ones, should be set off to the side to start. Now these little black hexagonal chips are influence tokens, influence being the main, I guess you call it the resource for the game, and these should be kept separate in an influence bank. Now, I just want to mention a few things that I'd recommend doing as part of your setup that aren't 100% necessary, but I found that they help streamline the game and avoid confusion throughout. First, with regard to these influence tokens, I'd recommend sorting them by denomination, so 1, 5, 10, 25, 50, and 100. Whether you want to use 6 little bowls or just what I do is I make separate piles in the lid of the game box, and it's big enough that that works perfectly well. You can also designate someone to be the Speaker of the House, who's essentially just the banker, and this makes it a lot easier to manage influence transactions during the game and avoid getting wires crossed. And the last thing I'd be sure to do before you get started is to alphabetize the state cards. This does take a minute. It might not seem like a big deal at first, but I promise it will save you a ton of time and grief, as you'll never have to go searching through 51 cards to find the specific state you're looking for when you're controlling a state. I think I've spent enough time on setup now that we can probably go ahead and talk about how you actually play the game. Imagine that. To begin, each player rolls 1 die to determine the order of play, with the highest roll, of course, going first. And on your first turn, you'll also roll 1 die for what's called your primary, which just dictates how much influence you'll have to start the presidential campaign with, but the primary just happens on each candidate's first turn. When it is your turn, the first thing you do is always to roll 2 dice to determine how far you move. Once you move, you can then do any other actions you like, whether it's playing cards from your hand, choosing to control the state you're currently located on, drawing a new card, establishing a field office, etc., whatever it may be. The only thing that's mandatory after your movement roll is drawing a card from the deck. So once you've done that, you're free to go ahead and pass the turn clockwise. And I should also mention that your pawn moves clockwise around the board with your movement roll. Now I have just a few more core game mechanics that I'll go over here, but everything I've said and then some is explained in fuller detail in the rulebook that comes with the game. The first thing I'll talk about is how you win the game. So what's the actual goal of playing? Of course, the ultimate goal or the ultimate objective of swing state is to win the presidency, which means you have to have the most electoral votes. There are technically 2 ways to win the game. Firstly, if any player gets 270 electoral votes at any point, they win the game, but they have to actually count them up and confirm that they have 270. This is by far the most likely win condition in a 2-player format, but it'll almost never happen with 3 or more candidates. If no player reaches 270 votes, the game doesn't end until all 51 states are controlled, and we're including DC as a state for our purposes here. At that point, everyone will tally up their electoral votes, and the candidate with the highest tally wins the presidency. Now, of course, to get to that point, you have to know how to control states, which is luckily straightforward enough. If you're standing on a state, you have the option to gain control of it. And the influence cost of that state is going to be double the electoral vote count of that state. So say you want Oregon, which has 8 votes. You'll first have to land on the state, and then you'll have to pay 16 influence to the bank. And at that point, you can then grab the Oregon card from the pile of state cards, and it's all yours. You can also flip a state that's already been controlled by an opponent, but you must then pay double the normal cost. So for Oregon, that would be 32 influence to flip the state. And to clarify, that influence that you spend to flip a state also goes to the bank, not to the player from whom you're flipping it. If you want to protect a state from being flipped by somebody else, you can pay 15 influence to put a field office on any state that you control. This will raise the cost to 3 times of the normal cost, or 6 times the electoral vote count of the state, making it really hard to flip. Now, to stick with our example of Oregon, if you put a field office on it, it will cost 48 influence to flip Oregon. And the field office is also huge because it blocks the signature swing state card, which players can use to flip states at a discount. And the power of the field office still doesn't end there, because if anybody lands on a state that has a field office, the owner of that state, or the person who controls it, then gets an influence payout proportional to the size of the state. And that includes if the person who controls the state lands on their own field office. So field offices are really useful overall, and they have a lot of different benefits, and definitely something to keep in mind is that you only have up to 3 at a time. So you got to make sure you're choosing wisely when you go ahead and establish one. Another big part of the game is the debate, which is probably how you'll earn most of your influence. Every time you reach or pass the debate square, again, that's that starting square in the corner, every time you reach or pass the debate square on your way around the board, you participate in the debate, unless you're expressly told not to do that by a card effect. Depending on various cards or state bonuses, this number may vary, but as a general matter, you default to rolling 2 dice for the debate. To calculate how much influence you get, you multiply your combined roll from those 2 dice by 5, then add 1 additional influence for each state you currently control. So say you roll a 4 and a 3 and you control 8 states. You would do 4 plus 3 times 5 is 35, and add another 8 for the states you control, 43 total influence. And I should mention that this formula for the debate, plus the primary rolls and the field office payouts, can all be found right here on the schedule card. So if you're ever confused about how much influence you should be getting, you can refer to that card or the rulebook. Now, the last thing I want to mention before I go ahead and wrap up this video is state bonuses, which is to say there are a few states on the board that give you special boons if you control them. I won't go too deep into these because it can be a bit confusing at first if you're still trying to figure out the basic flow of the game, and there are, I think, 6 different state bonuses, so it can be a little much to keep track of. So you have a bonus for Alaska and Hawaii together, one for Oklahoma and Kansas together, and then individual bonuses for Nevada, South Carolina, Delaware, and DC. For example, if you control both Alaska and Hawaii at the same time, you can jump forward from Hawaii to Alaska, or backwards from Alaska to Hawaii once per trip around the board, which can be super useful because it means you get a second shot at landing on California, or you can skip a small stretch of the board and move along to your next debate or the next part of the board faster. Whereas if you control DC, you can establish field offices for free instead of paying the normal 15 influence. So completely different, but also super useful. These state bonuses can be super fun to use and definitely add another layer of complexity and strategy to the game, and I think a lot of replay value, because it means you can take different approaches in different rounds of the game. So I definitely recommend giving them a quick look through before playing. Or if it's a bit much for the first time, then maybe if you come back to the game for a second round and you want to add a new dimension to change it up a bit, you can pay a bit more attention to them then. And when you are ready to go ahead and implement some of these state bonuses, they can be found with their full language and detail on the last page of the instruction book. Anyway, I think that should be just about enough for this introductory video, so I'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Again, this is my new board game Swing State, and I'd really appreciate it if you check it out, play it with your family and friends, and recommend it to anyone else who you think might like it. If by some miracle you've made it this far, thank you for watching, and I hope the contents of this video will be helpful to you in maximizing your enjoyment of Swing State. If you have any questions, clarifications, etc., please feel free to reach out via email at swingstategame@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram at swingstate_game, and I will do my best to get back to you ASAP. Thank you.